Hi, welcome to another week of the Cool Tools Show and Tell. We have a special guest this week, Jeff Waldman, who's recently wrote a book about tools, cool tools. We'll hear about that at the end, but right now I want Jeff, if you could just introduce yourself.
Sure.
First.
I'm Jeff Waldman, a little bit of a designer, builder, I guess now author, given this book. Just making stuff with my hands. It's kind of my thing.
And you're located in the Bay Area.
That's right.
Right now you're calling in from your studio workshop in Oakland, California.
That is right. I live in San Francisco. Got a little studio workshop, multidisciplinary thing that I share with some friends in Oakland. And then I've also got a sort of retreat space property that my wife and I and my friends have been building out in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Great. Well, we're very glad to have you, particularly since you've taken kind of a tour through the toolverse, all the tools. And so out of all these things that you've seen and the stuff that you use in your own work, what's a favorite tool of yours?
Oh, I've got a whole bunch of them, but
Sure.
I brought in a few to talk about today. First one we're going to talk about is screws. And this is going to start to sound like an infomercial for GRK Screws. It's not. They've never paid me. I wish they would send me free screws, but of the many tens of thousands I've purchased, they've all been purchased by me. So we all use screws to put stuff together. I'm sure, you've been making things for a long time. Do you remember maybe like a handful of decades back, if you built something with screws, they were pretty brittle. They would break. You wouldn't want to use them structurally. It's why we frame houses with nails. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So these days, we've got improved metallurgy. And I'm holding up a box here of GRK screws for a little brand recognition.
And is GRK a brand or is that the type?
It is a brand. So just to kind of get into some of what makes these screws special. For starters, instead of your old style Phillips head screw that has a tendency to cam out and strip, or a flathead that never works very well, these have your Torx Drive or your Star Drive. Now you'll see these on a lot of screws. Most of your decking screws now have Torx on them, automotive parts, all kinds of things have Torx. So it's not specific to GRK. GRK is a brand of screw, and I've tried all the brands of screws, and I just have a lot to say about this one. It's just so much better. If you got questions, or should I just go into my spiel?
Slow down a little bit. So the Phillips head, everybody knows, is kind of like a cross. The Torx looks more like an asterisk inside.
It does. A lot of people call it a Star Drive.
Star Drive, Torx. Yeah. And you have a bit that does that. And the advantage of that, of course, is that it's much more secure and doesn't strip out anything like the Phillips or the flathead does. So
no, I tell the story in the book, and I think a lot of people who build are now a little bit familiar with it, but Phillips screws cam out, and it's by design. When they were pioneered back in the day and made their way onto the automobile assembly lines, they found favor because they couldn't be over torqued. Somebody on the assembly line could crank it only just so before the screwdriver would slip out. Unfortunately, they found their way into being just about the most common screw there is, but they're not good. They just strip out very easily. It's hard to gain purchase on them. So yeah, the Torx Drive you're talking about, it just has more points of contact, more surface area. By design, it's really meant to hold and not to strip.
So have you made the Torx Drive sort of standard in your workshop beyond just sort of deck screws or other things, just in general?
Yes. Frankly, I've made GRKs the standard, but it's pretty much Torx across the board. Occasionally, stainless steel fasteners, if I really need to use them, they'll come with a Robertson drive or a square drive, as it's sometimes called. I think it has to do with the machining of the softer metal of the stainless. But by and large, it's just Torx across the board.
And do you have an opinion about the square drive, the Robertson square drive?
Yeah, it works well-ish. It certainly works better than Phillips, but I've had a lot of them strip out on me. Mm-hmm. These screws with their Torx Drive, I was trying to do the math recently, and at least on the GRK framing screws, I've driven something like between 50 and 70,000 of them. Now, this speaks to the drive style a little bit, but it also speaks to this brand and what they produce. I have stripped, I feel confident in saying less than 10, and I've never broken one of these. It just performs better.
Right. Okay.
And so, we have a property where we're out building decks in the trees and cabins, and you have to put up temporary scaffolding for this sort of thing, ladders. It's a sort of homestead where we're often building things and taking them apart and having a reusability to a screw where it's not stripping out and it actually can retain its functionality, not just as one-time use, is very important.
Have these replaced nails in framing by this point?
Almost entirely. On some large volume things or stuff where I feel like I'm just never going to take this apart, or I just want to breeze through it, I might use a nail gun, or I might drive a few nails by hand. These framing screws, and these are 3 1/8 inch long, mostly have replaced nails for me for framing, in part because they do cost a little bit more, but on a small project, the cost is marginal, but because you can undo your work. Right. And it's just a lot harder to undo nails and move them around.
What about like in, contractors, just kind of commercial contracting? Are they still using nails, or have they also gone to screws?
No, they're still using nails. It's really on smaller projects where somebody can do the math on it and say, well, for the cost of this. Once you start getting at scale, if you're building, an array of homes across a block, the nails are going to come out so much cheaper that I think that's what they're going for. And they're also moving at a pace that's a little bit less intentional, and they're kind of flying through it with nail guns. When I'm building a one-off project, like a little cabin, it's a marginal cost difference. I'm being a little bit more slow about it, a little bit more deliberate.
Right.
And so something that comes up frequently on our property is we're out there with friends of friends. We're showing people how to build for the first time. And there's a lot of people that are just making mistakes. It's nice to show them how to drive a nail, especially to drive a nail by hand. You don't want people to get too carried away with a nail gun because they start doing things they can't undo. But with screws, they can drive it. They can realize that they put that stud in the little wrong place, or it kind of walked. They can undo it and they can move it. And that's really helpful as a learning tool.
Right. And are you using like an impact driver to drive these?
Yeah, generally. Drill as well, but impact works well. These...
So tell me about the GRK version.
Sure.
Why are they superior to other deck nails?
Why aren't they superior? All right. So what I'm holding in my hand is their standard sort of framing screw. And I don't know what is so special about their metallurgy, but I've used other framing screws. I've used other premium ones, not to give Spax a bad name, but they're another company that makes a supposedly kind of premium screw. I've stripped them and I've broken them. 50, 70,000 of these I've driven. I've broken 0 and I've stripped maybe 10. These are screws, in not being able to bend or twist or snap them off, the trust that I'm able to put in it when I'm building a scaffolding and knowing that this thing that's kind of held together temporarily with 2x4s isn't going where is pretty big. They have a little self-starting tip that has, it has cuts into the sides of the threads the same way that a tap does. Starts into the wood easier, starts boring, does its job. There's actually some cutting heads, you can't quite see on the video, but there's some cutting heads just under the head of the screw to help countersink it in. And if you go past their framing screw to something like, this is their structural screw, which is a replacement for lags, where normally if you were driving a 3/8 inch lag bolt, you would have to pre-drill the heck out of that. These you don't have to pre-drill. These rating for this screw to be pulled out of the wood is 6,000 pounds.
Wow.
The International Building Code, ICC, they rate these as being better than lags. They're a replacement for it. You can even use these as a replacement for through bolting, like with a carriage bolt. Just absolutely phenomenal numbers, and just a lot of little attentions to detail. Like, I don't know how much you can see on video, but these have an aggressive thread where the barrel of the screw is thinner, the thread is longer and deeper. And because of that, you're pushing less metal through the wood. So the battery on your impact driver is going to last longer because there's less friction. They've got additional little cutting notches cut into the threads. So again, you don't have to pre-drill and it's just diving right in there. They just perform phenomenally. And like I said, tens and tens of thousands of these. Haven't had any break, stripped, as much as I can count on my fingers. And having used so many other ones, that's just remarkably impressive.
And so you mentioned that they were a little bit more expensive than nails, but how expensive are they?
I'm trying to remember the price. I would have to look it up. It ends up being something like, 20% more expensive or something to that effect. And it adds up, but it depends on the size of your project. If you were going to have a project where you're going to spend, $200 on nails, now you're spending, $270 on nails or on screws. At scale, it changes. And then just to continue talking about them a little bit, these little tiny screws that they'll use that are headless ones that'll sink into the wood a little bit deeper.
Like for decks?
You can use this for deck. They make them for composite decks as well. It's a trim screw. Sorry.
It's called trim screw?
Trim screw.
Okay.
So one of the issues you run into with other brands of trim screws, these are very tiny. What I'm holding in my hand is a little itty bitty thing that has a Torx driver of, I think it's a T15.
And a very small head. Very
small. And when you start getting into little metal pieces of that size, it's real easy for them to break and strip apart. And this is where the manufacturing really starts to shine, is the fact that you can take one of these little tiny screws, drive it in repeatedly, never strip it out, never break it. It's one of those things like anybody can kind of make a pretty decent large screw just because your wiggle room is quite a bit bigger. Mm-hmm. But to manufacture something this small with tolerances that tiny that will still hold up to the abuse of an impact driver is quite impressive.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a convert. They're really great. We have a mutual friend in Lloyd Kahn, and I sent him a bucket of these as a gift not that long ago, and I've done it with other friends as well. And it seems that for folks that I send a variety of GRK screws to, once they start on them, they don't go back.
Okay, well, I have a project in mind, some scaffolding, and so I may give it a try.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. I'm also interested in that you kind of converted to the Torx as a standard thing in a shop, which is, I don't know if can you get bolts and metric bolts and all kinds of stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Through McMaster-Carr, you can get anything, but these days, Torx, if not Torx, Hex when it comes to bolts, but there's some interchangeability there in terms of drivers. But Torx has kind of become the standard for a lot of things just because it bites so well and it doesn't tend to strip out a lot of surface area. And the nice thing about, I keep a T25 driver bit on my keychain. Anywhere on the property.
What's that?
It's just a size of Torx that's fairly common. Most of these framing screws you're going to get, most bolts, if they're in that kind of average usable size, there's a good chance it's a T25. Okay. And, having converted everything over to that, just to know exactly what you need to take something apart or to put it back together is, the bit that's sitting on your keychain or probably already on your driver is sort of nice.
Right. Well, fabulous. This is, we went deep into screws, but for me, that's the wonderful thing of learning about something that's superior. Yeah. That you may not ever know. You can't tell by walking down the aisle of Home Depot that these are going to be any better.
No, you really can't. And it just is one of those things that comes with the knowledge of having driven a lot of them and broken a lot in frustration.
So tell me about your second tool.
Second tool, I'm kind of cheating. It's actually two tools, but they go together. So what I have here in my hands are a tapered reamer and a tapered tenon cutter. Both of these are made by Veritas. They're available for purchase from Lee Valley Tool. And a tapered reamer looks like a drill bit that is flared out wide in the shape of a cone. And a tapered tenon cutter looks like a big pencil sharpener. And what these are used for is to make the joinery for putting together staked furniture. Joinery.
What do you say? Stake furniture?
Staked. So you can use them for any joinery. I mean, if you want to make a socket and you want to make a peg and put them together.
Right.
What I'm talking about today, where I use them, is where they happen to really excel. There's a really good book called The Anarchist Design Book that was written by Christopher Schwartz. Do you know Christopher Schwartz?
I don't.
I think he used to be the editor for Fine Woodworking or Popular Woodworking, something like that. Anyway, he wrote this book, and in the book, a good chunk of it deals with building what's called staked furniture. And staked furniture is an old style of furniture building. What I really like about it, I'm just barely starting to dabble in making furniture. I don't really know what I'm doing. It is a very approachable way to build strong furniture with a lot of forgiveness. So what I have here in my hand is a staked stool.
Ah, okay.
Now, the way staked furniture works, I don't know if you can see, but the leg of the stool comes all the way up through the top of the stool.
Right. So to describe for people who may be listening, it's there's kind of a plank stool, three-legged stool, and the legs go into the bottom of the stool. So at the top of the stool where you would sit, there's three discs that show the end of the leg that has been cut off and smooth.
So what's going on in there is the leg of the stool, as it goes into the top of the stool, the leg is tapered with pencil sharpener.
Right.
And it goes into a tapered socket in the stool seat. And because of that, instead of the joint being stressed over time when you're sitting on it, like if you have an old Windsor chair or something, those joints are always being stressed when you sit on them. Here, when you sit on the stool, you're compressing the joint. You're actually driving the tapered leg deeper into the tapered socket. And I actually have a tapered leg here that I made the other day. So basically, you just make a leg, you put it in the pencil sharpener, you drill some holes in a seat, you put this tapered reamer into the hole, and now you've got a tapered hole and a tapered leg. You shove them together with a little bit of glue and a wedge, and you've got a stool that's going to outlive many generations of you.
Right. So the alternative is you would have a leg or dowel that would be parallel. It would be kind of, an exact parallel fit, but the tapering is sort of self-tightening.
It's self-free, and it's getting stronger over time. When you put that exact fit in there, what you're relying on is the glue, and you're saying, I hope that this is nice and tight and the glue holds it and it doesn't wiggle loose over time. This can't wiggle loose over time because every time you're sitting on it, you're just reinforcing that connection deeper, stronger.
Great.
So if you're like me and you're thinking, I kind of would like to get into a little bit of furniture making, maybe a stool, maybe a chair, maybe a table. This I've found, and in combination with that book, is just a really foolproof way to slap something together that is absolutely bomb-proof, a lot of forgiveness. It doesn't take a lot of figuring out to drill a hole, widen it with this tapered drill bit, and then put a pencil sharpened leg into it.
Right. I'm just going to put a little picture of this is the Lee Valley page where theirs are being sold. So they're about $54 for the tenons.
Yep. And then for the tapered reamer, I think they sell two versions of it, and the cheaper version is absolutely fine. I think that's like $30 or something.
Yeah. Okay.
With those two tools, you can make furniture that will go last generations.
And this is not just stools or chairs, but also tables.
Yeah, I've got a couple tables at home that I made with it.
Yeah, cool.
Anything that's got a leg.
Yeah. Very nice. Okay. Well, that's a great tool. So thank you. And what's another third tool that you find a favor with?
Third tool is one that I think I actually read about on the Cool Tools blog some years back, but I'm still going to talk about it. And by the way, thank you for all the content over the years.
Sure.
And in this book, there are a decent enough number of tools that made appearances in that book or blog that I must admit I pulled from.
Sure.
So third tool for me is Sketchup. It is a design program, like a 3D CAD program. There are paid versions of it. There are still free versions available. I use the free version. It's SketchUp Make 2017. If you Google SketchUp free version, it'll come up in the first link. And, there's a lot of AutoCAD programs out there. This is what I found to be just the more approachable level, that for me to transition from pen and paper, and I'm a terrible drawer, to designing something in the computer, this was the path for me. And what I found is I can draw something on paper, and if you give me a ruler, I can kind of make it look okay. But ultimately, because sometimes I'm designing furniture, but where I really got my start on it was designing things for our property. You're talking about sheds, cabins, outhouses, showers. And in working through all those different design iterations, it's a lot of erasing. It's a lot of playing with all the different lumber sizes. And in the case of our property where we were building things in the trees, we had to map redwood groves to build treehouse type construction. And to do that with a pen and paper, I just found it to be very difficult. So I started using Sketchup, and that allowed me to design every aspect of these builds, figure out, to optimize it for, okay, I want my roofing to be exactly this length. I want to minimize my amount of cuts on plywood. You can use it to model where the sun is coming in, depending on the location of your property, to see where it's casting through the windows. You can play with the textures and the colors. And ultimately, for me, the biggest advantage wasn't actually the design process. So these days I'm a bit more of a competent builder, but it's been a very gradual process. And, everything that I've kind of designed and built is sort of as much as I was capable of at the time. So really pushing those boundaries of comfort. And when we're doing something out at our property in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we're going to have a bunch of friends come out. So on some weekend, all these friends are going to come out, and we're going to do a wall raising for a cabin, and it all has to go well. We need to have all the parts there. We have all the people. We get one shot at this, because I can't call you back out the next weekend to say, can we, try this all over again? And in SketchUp, not only was I designing everything and sorting out that, but I was digitally building it. And I was digitally building it dozens and hundreds of times, and problem solving along the way, and realizing, when this piece goes together and that piece goes together, it actually will block me from doing this. So I need to change my order of operations, stuff like that.
So this is interesting that you say that. So in what way were you building it hundreds of times in SketchUp? Do you mean because the way that you were designing it in the same order that you would build it? I'm not really sure, but
sure.
Where did the hundreds of iterations come from?
Yeah.
That's SketchUp.
Hundreds might be a bit of an exaggeration. Okay. We'll call it an even hundred. That seems fair.
Let's say dozens.
Yeah. So in the iterations so let's take our cabin, for example.
Actually, you sent me a little picture, a little movie. So maybe I think I can get that up here, and that might help people, at least who are watching, see what we're talking about. Okay, here. And I think I can play this.
Should be able to.
Yeah. So there it goes.
So that was a little A-frame that we recently built post fires. This was our cabin that burned down in 2020.
I'm sorry to hear that burnt.
Oh, it happens. Some tree decks where we had a wood-fired hot tub and some benches. And that was all in a redwood grove. And so we had to map that entire grove to kind of build that out. A little outdoor shower. That was Shisugi Bond redwood with a cedar slats that you were standing on. Hot water from an EcoTemp water heater. A little bit of a pavilion there.
So okay, so we got a sense of that. Then,
so you're wondering, where do all those? How are you building it digitally so many times? Right. So taking the cabin, for instance. at first, in just trying to work out what is the design of this cabin, I go through a couple of dozen different basic designs. But then I start to settle in on this is the design that we're going to build. But I have to refine it. Got to figure out exactly where your doors and windows are going and how I had some functional timber frame elements inside of a stick frame. How does that all go together? So I started building it, 2x4 by 2x4 inside there. And in the course of building it, I figure out, I got to change this or change that. But, it's all starting to come together, that order of operations. And I keep revising it until I've kind of worked out all those kinks. So at that point, you've got a few dozen times that I've kind of deconstructed and rebuilt this thing to iron out the problems. But even then, once it's sort of finalized, because I'm obsessive, but also because I want things to go well, because, we're up in the sticks. So we have to get, all the lumber delivered, all the materials there, all the people there. It's got to go. It's an orchestrated event that's got to go well, because it's hard to, get a repeat performance. So now I'm just playing with the digital model. I'm peeling back layers. I'm putting it together. I'm thinking through the order of operation in a way that navigating in 3D space and looking at it and moving the parts around is just different than doing it on paper. So there's a few dozen times of building it just in ironing out all the details, and then a few dozen more of just playing with it, just because I can practice digitally and figure out the exact flow of what I need people to do, where the fasteners will go. We should put a rigging line here. Here's where this can go wrong. Here's where that can go wrong. It's just, if you're like me and you don't have full confidence in this project you're about to embark on because it's pushing the limits of what you've done previously, the opportunity to practice it digitally before doing it in the real world is indispensable.
Wow, I had never really thought of that. Are you aware of other people using SketchUp in that same way of kind of, like you say, of rehearsing the build? Is that a common thing, or is that just kind of your little innovation?
I'm sure there are people doing it. The only example I can think of, and I haven't talked with him explicitly about it, is there's a friend of mine who's a designer, builder, Tom Bonamici. And I took a timber framing workshop from him some time ago, and he's taught a few of them. Mm-hmm. He designs those timber frames in SketchUp, and there's very much an order of operation to assembling a timber frame. And I have to imagine that when he's thinking all that through so that he can instruct the students in a way that will, make it seem like he actually knows what he's doing, he's probably practicing that, looking with the SketchUp model. But otherwise, I haven't spoken with anybody explicitly about it.
I know, just from watching YouTube, I know there are people who use SketchUp for furniture making. Yeah. And occasionally they will talk about discovering something in trying to design it that informs how they would wind up building it in terms of things that didn't work. Particularly if there were moving parts, like, So I guess I don't know SketchUp that well, but I guess you can put hinges in, the hinges can swing. Is that
I think
correct?
That's possible, but if I'm being honest, I haven't actually done that.
Okay.
I'll swing a door, but kind of manually to check clearances, but I haven't done anything I've done things very granular in the building sense, down to every layer of construction on a building, but I haven't really gotten in furniture building down to, hinges and those sorts of clearances.
Right. The one advantage of SketchUp in building things like this is that it's much easier to accommodate the fact that everything does have a thickness, right?
Yes.
Part of the first lesson for most people designing things on paper is that, plywood has a thickness, and you can't just have a line there. You actually have to have a thickness, and that difference over.
An easy example of this is, if you were building a little tiny shed that had, 4x8 plywood, like that T111 kind of fake siding plywood, they're 4 feet by 8 feet. So you might think, okay, I'll make my shed 8 feet long. But the plywood has to overlap on each corner, and that's a 1/2 inch. So really your framing is, a 1/2 inch shorter than 8 feet. Like those little tiny things, they come into play, and it's nice to work it out from the comfort of, my computer before actually trying it.
And so you said you used the SketchUp 2017 free version.
Yeah.
Is it mostly because it's free, or are there other advantages to that?
It was entirely because it's free.
Okay.
And it's just one of those things that I've sort of coasted by on inertia.
Uh-huh.
It would probably do me well to explore the paid versions and to maybe even see, now that I've gained some experience in SketchUp, to see
Right.
what other programs are available. But the reason I'm talking about it here is I gravitated towards it because it was very attainable. It's
Right.
free. There are YouTube tutorials. There's nothing stopping me from just downloading it and seeing what it's like to design my gazebo in that instead of on a piece of paper.
I tried to design the recent house in SketchUp knowing zero, and man, that was very frustrating. And the tip that I got was to begin with a top view only for designing the house, just as a one dimension or as a single dimensional thing, just the top view down, like a plan, and then work from there. That was helpful, but not sufficient, because man, I was very, I don't know. I find it kind of overwhelming to do it, but I maybe would suggest people not start with trying to design a house first.
Yeah. My suggestion, the top view down is very important. Navigating in 3D space is just difficult, and there's a steep learning curve to it. We do it fine in the real world, but on a computer, it's very tricky. There are tutorials you can follow on YouTube that'll kind of help. You can also download existing models, and I've found along the way that it was very helpful for me to get somebody else's cabin or building and to just take it apart and play with it instead of designing from scratch. And that helped in kind of understanding those things.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, great. That's really fantastic. I think SketchUp is, but like a lot of softwares, it's sort of can be a black hole in terms. The more powerful it is, the steeper the learning curve.
Yeah.
But there is huge power in it, and the fact that there's free versions is really great.
Yeah.
So thank you. So let's, Jeff, talk about your recent project, a book about tools.
Tools. Yeah.
So tell me about this. Give me your little morning TV show pitch. What is this about, and why do people want it?
Tools is a book that chronicles a little over 500 tools that you would commonly find, semi-commonly, in the home, shop, garage, that sort of thing. So it's got screwdrivers and hammers and welders and milling machines. One thing that I found lacking in a lot of the other books that are out there is that they tend to focus on the home woodworker and those sorts of hand tools, the romantic version of woodworking, hand planes and stuff, or they're very specific to metalworking. I couldn't find any comparable books that were as broad as I wanted that to be, where you'll find a heat gun and a come along hoist, milling machine. What I tried to do.
Here's saws.
Yeah.
Both the hand saws, reciprocating saws, jigsaws, miter saws. Yeah.
So to me, there's, in this very vast world of tools, there is a lot of commonalities between things, but it's hard to put those puzzle pieces together to kind of figure out that map of it. And a lot of tools relate to one another. In some cases, one version of a tool is just kind of like this other thing, but a little bit different. But if you don't have the language for it, it's very hard to go out there asking informed questions or to go and kind of do the Googling that you would want to do. So what I was trying to do was just to create a map of, this is the world of tools. It is sort of unendingly vast, so I can only go so deep, but I wanted to put together enough of the broad strokes pieces so that if you don't know a lot about them, you can look in there, find the thing that you're looking for, and start going down a deeper rabbit hole of investigation. And then in terms of a value for, if somebody might already have a pretty deep knowledge of their woodworking or their metalworking or whatever it is, there's a good amount of historical anecdotes, just trivia, some weird esoteric tool variations that folks might not have heard of. Just a lot of little odds and ends that would hold the interest, I think, of those who are even a bit more seasoned.
Right. So I am a big advocate for these kinds of surveys of tools because I consider them, each one of these is a possibility, and knowing that the tool existence is there can often ignite an idea in you or confidence in trying something. Maybe later on when you confront a problem, you'll think of a solution. Oh, I think there's a tool for this. I remember reading it in Jeff's tool book. And so, there are a lot of jobs that sort of can't really be done unless there's a tool. Recently, for the very first time, I pulled some bearings off of a motor. Well, there's a bearing pulling tool that you need. There's really no other way to get them off intact without this tool. And it's like, well, you kind of have to know that it kind of exists, and you may never need it, but it's good to know that it's there. And that kind of a general sense of what's available is sort of what your book is doing.
Well, planting that seed and letting you know something exists, I mean, that was a core tenet of Cool Tools and the Whole Earth catalog for so long.
Right.
And that's a lot of what I wanted to impart into this was both from, folks I've worked with who knew more than me, and from a lot of the stuff that you've written or been a part of. I have had so many moments over the years, that aha moment where they just tell you a thing exists and you didn't know it existed until that moment. And you're like, oh yeah, of course. I don't need that right now, but boy, is that good to know about.
Right.
So I was just racking my brain when I was writing this, trying to distill all of those little aha moments and to pack as many of them into there as possible. And there's, in writing about the tools that I wrote about in there, a lot of times, I'm making it a point to just mention that this version of a thing exists. Just because to even know that it's out there is huge. And for an aspiring maker, somebody who works with their hands, those trips down that book, or the literal trips down the aisle in the hardware store where you see a thing and you're like, oh, bearing puller. Okay. Right.
Right.
That's the thing.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
One of the things is, this book is sort of a survey of the, it's kind of like a taxonomy of tools. It's all the varieties and species. You don't actually make specific recommendations of a particular brand.
Generally not.
And because they're going to change so fast, right? I mean, it's like
they're going to change so fast. I make mention of a few standout models that seem to be stalwarts that have just been around for a long time.
Such as what? Can you give an example of that?
Bridgeport milling machine. I mean, people are still looking for, Bridgeports that are 60 years old to use today.
Right.
So there's a couple of standout brands or models that I'll make mention to, but by and large, it doesn't matter too much. You don't know if they're going to be around. Cordless battery-powered tools are ubiquitous these days, and I own a ton of them. But the truth is, especially among pro-grade models, if anyone has an allegiance to a certain brand, it really speaks more to an investment in their battery ecosystem than it does their performance. Something I advocate for in the book anyway is, if you're going to buy a tool, buy the cheapest one you can get your hands on. Like if you think that it might have a use to you, you can get them dirt cheap. Try it, use it, break it, see how it goes. And then depending on what you learn, you can start looking down the road at the deep, deep hole of, what's the best version of this.
Right. I concur 100%. I'm a huge fan of Harbor Freight for that very reason. You can get, and often the Harbor Freight thing will survive and do what you want to do as infrequently as you're doing it for most of your life. If you get to the point where you need better and are using it, you move up. But Harbor Freight are often a fantastic bargain,
Oh yeah.
even though they're way below the premium quality. They're adequate for a first step.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think a problem for many folks, myself included, is you start thinking, and I write about this in the intro to that book, I need a nail gun. Well, what's the right nail gun? What's the best nail gun? What does it mean that it fires a nail at this speed or this pressure, or this angle? And you get bogged down in so much of that, you go, well, I don't think I'm going to buy any nail guns because it's too weighty of a proposition. But if you just say screw it and you go to Harbor Freight and you're like, you just grab the cheapest thing that's on the wall, just get it, buy it, use it, and then learn from there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I concur. I think it's fantastic advice. Or another one too, which I also recommend if you can do it, is like when you have an invitation to use one or borrow one, like you were talking about, organizing some friends to come over and do something. Presumably you'll have tools that they have never used before, and so this is a chance to try some tools out. That's another great way to see whether this is even going to work for what you want it to do.
Yeah, completely.
And by the way, this is a whole side thing. A cool tool trick is renting tools.
Yeah.
Go to Home Depot.
Tool libraries.
Or tool libraries, but look at the tools that you can rent. And the thing is that most contractors often rent these tools because they don't need them that often. But you can rent amazing things and amazingly specific things, that you like a tile saw, a wet saw for cutting bricks or whatever, which you would never think of doing. But you can get a saw that does that and rent it for a day or half a day. There are amazing things for rent.
Yeah. And I mean, and when you consider, especially something like a tile saw, the frequency that you're probably going to use it, renting starts to make a lot more sense.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What else? Do you have any other kind of general tips besides start cheap and work up from your journey into the world of tools that you might tell people?
General tips. Starting cheap and working up is absolutely a big one. I like the borrowing, go to a tool library. And I think what both of those kind of boil down to is just actually doing the thing.
Right.
Kind of taking this back, a half step back from tools to building. I've had so many people who have come out to our property and said, I'd love to have something like this, but I can't do it. Well, neither could we. Like, we just started with a picnic table, and you kind of build up some confidence and skills, and you learn how to use the one tool, and then you go from there and you do the next thing. And I think that it's really important to put one foot in front of the other and actually learn by trying and a little trial and error than to get too bogged down with the proposition of the big picture that might just kind of stymie the whole process. So that's sort of, a core ethos for me. And then, taking care of your tools, borrowing tools from friends, making use of that kind of larger community resource. I think there's a little bit too much of everybody attempting to buy their own thing when, folks can share stuff. I'm a big fan of lending tools to friends. Right. Hopefully they come back in one piece.
And are you, have you went up at YouTube for learning how to use tools?
Yeah. I like YouTube for learning. There's some decent books out there. YouTube's good for the learning by doing, which I'm a very big proponent of.
There's a certain basic set of skills for using tools, and particularly power tools, but occasionally there's a certain degree of things that you kind of want to know with power tools in particular because of safety issues. And I mean, obviously there's a caveat to that in terms of, you want to be brazen enough to learn some things and not get too, held back by the fear of, doing it, but you also don't want to lose any fingers in the process. Right.
So a little bit of guidance goes a long way. There are I'm sure there are in many cities, but here in Oakland, we have the Crucible, and there's a couple other places you can go where you can take classes. I actually took a gift from my now wife, a welding class over there that was it was like a cheese tasting of welding. We did a little bit of TIG and a little bit of stick and a little bit of MIG. So taking a class at a local makerspace to learn the basics of how not to injure yourself before, embarking down the road of a more involved self-taught journey, I think is really important. I mean, I took a timber framing workshop some years ago, and the truth is I haven't used a whole lot of that timber framing, but I was around a bunch of people who knew tools, and we were doing a lot of little auxiliary work, and there's a lot of little safety tips. Job site safety, just all those little nuggets of wisdom on how to stay safe while you're working with these things that are powerful and building things. So taking classes and workshops and just soaking up as much of that as you can. Frankly, just soaking it up, period. I mean, not to pimp my book too hard, but a book like that, any other books like that, taking a walk down the trip of the hardware store, a walk down the aisle to just really soak up what exists there, what you have available to you, what options there are. Because I think the more that you kind of build that network in your head of those best practices, how things kind of all connect together, the more you can fill in those pieces, and you're a little bit less likely to hit an impasse down the road where you go, I don't know what to do from here, or I'm afraid I'm going to hurt myself, because you've kind of built up a foundational knowledge.
Yeah. In fact, that's a good analogy of where your book is. It is like walking through a big box store in the tool section and having you say, well, here's what you do with this one. This one's over here. This is pretty good. And you'll need both of these if you have that one. So it's the guide to the tool section of the store. So thank you, Jeff, for this book. By Chronicle Books, I believe, and recently released a wonderful ultimate guide to tools, hand tools, and power tools. Yeah. So thanks for being on the show and showing and sharing your favorite tools. And we'll see everybody in a week. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
We're glad that you enjoyed this issue of the Cool Tools Show and Tell. Just want to remind you that we have some other coolish material on our YouTube channel here. Please subscribe, comment, like. In addition, this Cool Tools Show and Tell is also available in an Audible podcast form. You can subscribe to it wherever you subscribe to other podcasts if you just wanted to listen. And if you're listening, know that there is a visual version of this on our YouTube channel, where we're actually showing the tools, and there's a little bit more of a visual component there. In addition, the same folks that put us, the Cool Tools website out, we also put out a free newsletter every week. It's very, very short. It's 1 page or less. We recommend 6 very brief items that are very succinct, easy to read. You can deal with it in a couple minutes. And every week we bring to you the 6 cool things that we have uncovered and want to share. And it's called Recommendo with 1 M, recommendo.com. You'll be able to find it there. It's free. Join 50,000 plus other subscribers every Sunday morning. You'll get it in your email box. And it's actually one of the most popular things that we produce. But we do produce other newsletters as well. One of them is called What's in Your Bag. We have one that goes out to tools and tips for your workshop. So you can get those at our website, and they are also free. And finally, I want to mention the fact that we do have a Patreon, and this podcast and this vidcast are supported by Patreon supporters. The minimum is $1 a month. And for that, you get an email to ask us anything. We'll respond and answer your question if we're able to. There are other higher levels. You can all see those at our Patreon page. And all those links are below right here. So thank you again for being a fan. And we'll keep producing stuff if you enjoy it. Thanks. Thank you to this week's patrons, which include Sari Willis, Jamie Ehrman, Brian Brooks, David Rager, Allison Pescasolio, John Hobson, Alan Lawson, Bill Patrick, Chip Riggs, and John Paul Bosoli. Thank you all.